Hello everybody. So me and DK will be discussing about the premise by Lajos Egri, and this is the first chapter from his book The Art of Dramatic Writing. But before we proceed to what premise is, we have to talk about the author himself. So Lajos and Egri was a Jewish author born in Hungary. He was famous for writing the book The Art of Dramatic Writing, which is widely regarded as one of the best works on the subject of playwriting, though its teachings have since been adapted for the writing of short stories, novels, and screenplays. So Egri wrote his first three-act play at the age of 10, and that is amazing in itself. The way he wrote the book is that he was able to uncover the secrets of successful playwriting. In He formulated his discoveries in a way that's very simple and direct, like it's easy to understand, and he does not beat around the bush. So yes, and so let's proceed to premise. What is a premise? The premise is the underlying or core idea of your story. So this is the foundation that supports your entire plot. So the premise usually identifies your protagonist and the central dilemma. So the premise is also known as a purpose. So it's kind of the same as in real life. Each individual has their own purpose in life. So that's what a story needs, a purpose. So a play or a story should have a driving force, an aim, or like a thesis of the entire plot. So basically, a premise is something that is kanang something that summarizes the entirety of the plot. And well, there are actually a lot of like scholars who talked about it, but in a way it's actually different. Like example, Ferdinand Brunetier says it's goal, and then another said it's a root idea, it's the beginning of the process. And then another says theme, and the other says that asks like how can you tell what road to take unless you know where you are going? So basically all of these are just the same. Um, they're all just talking about the same thing, the premise, the entirety of the play in a like summarized version of the entirety of the play. So here are very good examples. So let's go with the first example because that's something that we all know, Romeo and Juliet. So the premise is great love defies even death. And that itself is a very good example of a premise because it actually summarizes the entirety of the story. And you know the story is about love, great love that defies even death. And how did they defy it? They defied everything: their ranks, the betrayal of everyone that they know, and even that great love resulted to a death. To deaths, like their deaths, and that's what makes it brilliant in itself because it summarizes the entirety of the play, and it's like the thesis of the play. Okay, and it's the same goes for the other. King Lear is blind trust leads to destruction. Macbeth is ruthless ambition leads to its own destruction. And Dead End has poverty encourages crime. And these are really good examples. Like, let us proceed to formulating a premise, which is discussed by DK.
How to formulate a premise. We need to understand that there are three main parts of a premise, and these are 1. Character, 2. Conflict, and 3. Conclusion. We need to remember that the character of the traits of the character must be established in the premise. This could be done early on at the beginning of the story, or it could be established. The traits of the character could grow as the premise progresses. How to begin a premise? You can use any ways to arrive at your premise. You can either start with a premise and then build a story around it, or you can start with the story and then as the story progresses you can come up with a premise. There is no right or wrong in how to formulate or start or how to begin with the premise of your story, as long as it's concrete and it's cohesive all throughout the story. Um, there must be conviction in it, and the premise mustn't change as the story progresses. So here are some tips on how to make a good premise for a story. So first, the premise must always have three parts, and the three parts that were mentioned before were again character, conflict, and conclusion. Number two, there can be many subplots in the story, but there must only be one premise. Each of these plots, if there are any, must um, must contribute or end with the premise. So there can't be two or more premises but one. Number three, as for the character, it's best that the journey this character undergoes is a fact-finding journey. Like the character must discover what the problem is, what the conflict is, or how to go about with solving the problem. Hence the conclusion. Um, Therefore, if a story is complete but no premise, do not continue. Go again. Start from the beginning. This time, start with the premise, because the story will not be a good one if that happens. Number five, for this you must believe. It's best that you believe in the premise. It doesn't necessarily have to be um, factual or realistic, but as long as you believe that there is a problem that needs to be solved. Um, Number six, the reasons behind everything, the cause of the premise of the conflict, it needs to be realistic, and most importantly is interesting, because this draws the attention of the readers to the story. It'll compel the readers. And number seven, if the premise becomes unrealistic or it doesn't go well with the story as the story progresses, it's best to change the premise. This if you continue and the premise doesn't become cohesive with the story, it will disrupt the story flow and then make it a bit silly in the end. So here's some things to keep in mind when formulating a premise. So number one, there may be more than one ways to phrase or to describe the premise, but the thought must be the same. There must only be one. There must be only one premise, but you can describe the premise or phrase the premise in any way you want, in multiple ways. But as long as the thought must be there. Number two, you must use the right emotion in order to evoke the emotions of the readers. If the premise calls for for the character to be sad, then use the sad emotions in order to evoke sad emotions in the readers. Number three, again, you must believe in the premise. There must be conviction. You need to believe that there is a problem in the story that you are making, so that the audience, the readers, will also believe that there is a problem that needs to be solved. And number four, lastly, the premise doesn't necessarily have to be factually true or real, but it has to be valid. It has to feel as if that the main character needs to do this, needs to solve something. Otherwise, yes, you can create a good story, a cohesive story with a cohesive premise. But if the premise doesn't feel like necessary, that it doesn't feel necessary for the overall character development, then it's all a dud. It doesn't matter. You'll have a bad story in the end.
So basically, the conclusion is every play, novel, short story, or even real life must have a premise. The premise is the conception, the beginning of the play. So this is something that every play should have, because every scholar or like literature student or teachers and other people would like to analyze the story in a way that's simple, or like they want to know the root idea of the entirety of the play. So you need to have that to have it to be I mean to have your play successful. And in a way, for you to have that is that you don't need to have two more premises. You only need to have one. And make sure you stick to that. You need to defend your premise against people who commented on it. So like that premise should be supported by the entirety of the plot. So when you formulate this premise, you need to have three parts: the character, conflict, and resolution or conclusion, which was discussed by DK. And that's something that you should take note of when you create a premise, because that's how you summarized the entire play. So you need to have that. And you know that a good premise represents the author according to Egri. And so you should yeah, it's really just simple. The premise is just it's a summary of the entire plot, the main point, the driving force, the root idea of your entire play. So yeah, you really need to prove your premise though. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you for listening.